So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for June 29th, 2022. We will follow our standard agenda, which was tagged in the issue, which was issue 1249 in the TSC repo. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? Okay, sounds like we don't have any announcements. In terms of updates from the CPC and board, I don't have any updates from the board. And I guess since we don't have Rich this week, I think on the CPC front was a working session. I wasn't able to make that, so I don't think we have any updates this week on either of those fronts. Other than I think it is around the time for elections in terms of confirming like the impact representatives. I think Rich is our current one, but there'll be a cycle for us confirming like who our representative is for the next year. Sorry, just taking a quick note there. Okay, so we can move on to the issues that were tagged for the agenda. The first one is move stream development out of core. I'm just opening up to see who. So I think Ronag, it was
Robert, yeah, Robert.
Robert, yeah.
Yeah, I opened that because I think there are advantages of doing it outside of core. Specifically, we can do bug fixes and things like that and get them out to users much earlier than is the case today. And given how we've been doing Untitled and bringing that into Node Core, and that's proven to work quite well, I think we should apply this same workflow for streams as well. And I think the recommendation right now is that users should use Readable Streams package, or at least that I think is Matteo's and my recommendation.
Well, it was, I would not, like, up until a few months ago, a few weeks ago, I would not, like, it was so old, the Readable Stream package, that probably was not worth using. So I was not even recommending it, but if we can keep that up to date, and this is the problem, that the thing was diverged pretty heavily.
Well,
so
it would be easier to keep it up to date if we do the development there.
Right. The one question and I think I raised this concern in the thread, is about the rate of breaking changes. All right, you know, my one fear would be that this would actually accelerate the possibility of breaking changes in that API. So what do we need to have any processes in place to make sure that any breaking changes that do happen there are visible to the TSC for review?
Yeah, I guess we could.
Yeah,
I think we kind of have the same problem with Untitled, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, with Untitled, at least we're not exposing any of that Untitled's actual, you know, API. If breaking changes happen in Untitled's API, then that's one thing. It's just limited to fetch, which is a standard API, and we're going to have visibility on the breaking changes. We're not necessarily responsible for doing those, and it's unlikely that that's going to happen. So it's a slightly different situation.
I would say it's less likely with fetch, but we're also, you know, not following the standard there 100% either. So, like you, yeah. But yeah, I get your point.
And the motivation is like the prime motivation is to better keep the package up to date, or?
Well, there are multiple motivations. Like, it makes contributing to stream easier. It also allows us to push out fixes earlier. So, for example, I don't know how relevant this is right now, but historically we've done a lot of fixes for streams, including some very major ones that users haven't been able to take advantage of until we, for example, do a Semver major release of Node. And there's no actual reason why users couldn't take advantage of that.
But I guess, like, you could, if we currently do releases from Node, you could just do those more frequently, right? Is that just playing the devil's advocate?
I mean, we do some very major releases when we do some very major releases. This is the reoccurring problem with Node, that you can't do partial updates. Like
No, I didn't mean releases of Node. I meant releases of the package.
Well,
Like,
that is currently is cut from Node Core. So basically, it supports for Node Core supports.
So one question I have is how will we deal with, at the moment, Streams does behave differently between the different versions of Node, in that, because like you said, we've not taken Semver major changes into, well, obviously because they're Semver major, into earlier release lines. And we've had issues where things have been backported where they shouldn't have been backported because they were actually dependent on other changes, then things weren't labeled. So naively, I would assume then it would involve maintaining multiple versions of Readable Stream for the different versions of Node. Or, I mean, how's that going to work in terms of behavior? Because the reason,
Michael, can you promote Rich in?
Yeah, I can't. Apparently I can't. So I don't know why. I can't. I tried and I
didn't mean to step on either, Richard. Go ahead.
That's okay. No, because yeah, I mean, the reason we don't take breaking changes into the early releases of Node is because by definition they're breaking, and we do follow Semver. So I guess what is the argument that it would free people from being tied to a particular version of Streams for a particular version of Node, in that they can break themselves if they deem that's what they want to do on an LTS line.
Yeah, I mean, for example, there was a comment here with Happy that Happy has been broken with the stream changes. But then, Happy can use Readable Streams, and hopefully they don't have any issues if they have stream-specific stuff.
That's not entirely correct, because we did some changes, and the part that we broke them was because there were changes in HTTP. So yeah, but inheriting from streams and so on, it actually broke them.
So I mean, I guess my point is, if we continue to ship streams in LTS versions of Node, we need to make sure that we don't break the LTS versions. I mean, it doesn't change the Semver contract for Node, right? So whatever is in Node would have to keep behavior, API, surface area, the whole thing, because otherwise, as I'm sure you're aware, breaking streams is very painful in the ecosystem.
So I mean, the thinking here is: do we want people to use the core streams or the package streams? The upside of using the package stream is that people can choose to update whenever they want, and then they don't get force broken by a Semver major of Node.
But as long as we are shipping that API in Node, we are still going to have to maintain it in Node. So yes, it would add an additional option for developers, but in terms of actual maintenance, it would probably, I don't know. Yeah, I'd have to think about this, because just because you can update to a different version doesn't mean that we would still need to maintain the thing that is shipped with versions in the LTS lines.
Yeah, my primary issue is if we want people to break themselves, use the package, then avoiding the situation we were in just a few months where the package is years behind Node Core is not a good idea. And I think an easy way to avoid that is to do the development in the package.
Ruben had his hand up.
In what way is it actually different for streams versus any other core module? Because we could have a very similar argument for others, right? And
Yeah.
and that's something I don't really yet grasp.
I think the argument applies equally to any of the modules. So.
Yes and no, except for the modules that have native dependencies, because those just wouldn't work as packages. So modules that don't require native dependencies, yeah, I agree. I personally would prefer them to be developed outside of core that way, but that's just my personal preference.
I guess my other concern is if we encourage modules out there to switch to the standalone readable stream, then we would potentially have less coverage of the sort of inbuilt readable stream. And I kind of have this nagging feeling that the coverage we have already in Sitchin is probably not extensive enough to be catching the regressions that we have seen.
Just to point out, we're already partly in that situation.
Okay.
We've had historically the recommendation that you should use readable streams. And a lot of packages out there do use readable streams instead of the core streams. So we already is in kind of that situation-ish. I think it was after Node 14 that the readable stream package was significantly outdated, that Node core streams were preferred.
So, Colin makes the point there in the chat, we just slow down the breaking changes to streams. I think the changes there have been valuable in terms of improving correctness and stuff, but the breaking changes have been painful for a lot of people. It's like, personally, I have no problem with where we want to do, if we want to do the development on that particular piece and do it in a separate project, I have no concern about that particular thing, that particular piece. My concern is 100% the rate of breaking changes and observability of breaking changes to the larger project. So if this can be done in a way that, ensures that there is a really good process for, okay, here's a breaking change, it needs to be reviewed. It's, even though it's done off in this other repo, it still needs TS, the 2 TSC sign off, review and this kind of thing, like what we would do in core. And then the schedule for when those breaking changes actually go out needs to line up with Node's LTS schedule, so that there's things don't get out of sync there. So it's what I see is moving it out has some benefits, but also it's going to increase some of the process complexity here, and I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, and there's not so much going on with streams at the moment. So again, I can't say whether this has value or not right now. I don't know. Mattia, do you have any thoughts on this? We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I do, and I'm not necessarily. I'm very conflicted on this topic. So I can totally see the reason why we want to do it, and it will simplify the development significantly. It would also mean that we can actually make sure that the latest fixes and so on reaches everybody very quickly. So I'm very positive on the topic. On the other hand, I don't think we have the workforce to do all of what James is asking. So it's like giving core the guarantees of stability and stuff requires significantly more work than the people that have been currently involved in streams can provide. And also, we could allocate, even if we did, we could allocate that work in other areas of code that probably need more work anyway. So I am not convinced. So again, it's not that I think it's a great idea. I'm just not convinced it's the right use of development time that we have right now. Again, if there is people that are willing to do work on core, there's a lot of work to be done on what-to-do streams, okay? And that needs a lot of work and iteration at the minute. And because the process that James is describing is really like a lot, it's a significant amount of work
Yeah.
to make it to do. So it's the reason we can move faster in Undici, Robert, is because we don't have those restrictions. And basically we can do, oh, we need to do a release, and we just send a message on Slack, and it's just a single command away, okay? And we could bump a major because we just want to, and it's not a big problem for anybody yet, okay? But the moment we can decide, I would say we might want to wait, decide if at ever we bring Undici into core with the full API, figure out the process with that, and then maybe reassess. That would be my recommendation right now. Having two projects in between, maybe not a great idea. Also, anyway, we should not be changing streams, node core streams, apart from the fact that we plan to, but that's a different story. Sorry, Colin. We are probably going to do some additions to the family, not breaking changes though, additions. So you should be fine. But it's there is some stuff that I have been that we have been planning with Isaacs. So we might want to, Isaacs might do work some stuff on our things for a bit.
Okay, I think there's been a pretty good discussion. We might want to move on to some of the other topics. Could continue the discussion in the issue as well. Does that make sense at this point, or should we spend more of the time today on it?
I'm not sure we need to spend time on this.
You can move it back into the issue.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so let's move on to the next issue, which is number 43382, which is consider explicit string formatting module. I think Ruben, you opened that one. I'm not sure if you put it on the agenda, but do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I personally recommended to open up a new module that is explicitly only there for anything that has to do with string formatting. Involving colors, involving whatever format you have with util inspect and so on, because util at the moment is pretty overloaded with a lot of different things. And we do have good formatting in there, but it's just next to other tooling, pretty much. And we spoke on the Collaborator Summit about and the necessity pretty much of further coloring support in Node Core directly, not only for the users, which is very good out of my perspective as well, but also for Node Core itself, actually, that we are able to easier colorize output. And I said, okay, I'm happy to implement that. And I went ahead and wrote some code which in the end has a very similar interface, or actually it has the same interface as Chalk does, because in that case, I played around with different APIs. Chalk is the #1 API used in the ecosystem at the moment. And it felt like the most intuitive one that I could also think about. So that's why I've done that. At the same moment, I reached out to Zintra Zorhos, who is the next to Josh, one of the main maintainers of Chalk, but he did not react so far. I don't know, and that I did that. And when Josh saw that, well, he thought it was offending because the same API from the interface. So it was not ideal, definitely, how things worked out, because we obviously do not want to harm anyone in the ecosystem who has done a lot of work, and Chalk is a very valuable module in the ecosystem. That's pretty much the point. There was a big discussion then afterwards about how things worked out or not, pretty much. And that's where we stand at the moment. So I reached out to Josh, who who felt offended, definitely, and we discussed that we can also sit together and discuss how we can pretty much progress in general in this topic. There's no specifics yet, we didn't get to it yet, but I thought it is definitely the right direction to de-escalate things, to find out a way how can we work closer together instead of having any further bad feelings.
I guess I think I'll just add it's probably related to the other issue that James then added to ask that we add to the agenda, which is vendoring and namespaces.
Yep.
I guess it just highlights that one of the things we need to think very carefully about when we look at bringing more things into core in terms of, additional API is we should consider overlap with existing modules and impact on that front, which, thinking purely technically, in the collaborator summit, we've really focused on the technical and, the technical side versus like, okay, what the greater ecosystem impact, but this is a good sort of wake up call that's an important thing to cover as well. So Matteo's got his hand up.
I wanted to say a thing on the Chalk topic, okay? And a significant part of that discussion and part of the friction that there is right now in the ecosystem regarding Chalk is related to ESM. And I think it's, as Node.js and the TSC, we should give a little bit of guidance on those situations, because people are like Sindre and others have taken a significant route in the ecosystem, but the ecosystem has not essentially followed, or has not followed completely. And there is there is a problem there. Okay, I'm not wanting to say it's, but it's something that we should, I think, address or communicate something about, because it's the numbers tells a story. Okay, so people are now that NPM reports version, they download for each version number. The most downloaded version of Chalk is the version that was supported by that version that was supported, the ASM version. Sorry, the CommonJS version. Okay.
So, but it's not sustainable for us to vendor bundle every single one of these popular modules.
No,
ESM, right? And just to keep
I understand the problem. I understand the problem. Okay. And it's so there is two. So I think there is two. So what I wanted to point before we move to the vendoring proper and so on and the communication of it, it's that we have these are actually two problems that are separate. One is a fraction of the ecosystem has migrated to SM. A lot of popular packages have fully migrated to SM, and the community has not followed. Okay, creating a significant problem. Okay, and I was just checking Node Fetch, and Node Fetch, the CommonJS version has 18 million downloads in the last week, and the ESM version has 300,000 downloads in the last week. Just to give you a hint on the and I'm not saying that, but I think we should say something, okay, and about this topic, because it seems that reading some of the messages that that were posted on the thread, that the recommendation of Node was to migrate to ESM for some reason. And I don't think we ever did migrate everything to ESM and stop supporting CJS. So
that we maintain support for both. I mean, and making a statement, I think is fine. Like having some kind of guidance and stuff is fine.
Yeah.
But I really think that is a separate issue.
Yeah.
Here,
That's what. Yeah,
right?
that was. But with Chuck, the two things, like the problem here is that the two things. Well, we're talking about Chuck, because essentially myself as the first user of Chuck, one of the users of Chuck, as was basically I felt that I could not rely on this module anymore, and therefore, what should I use now? And it's and this is a problem that a lot of people in the community have right now. So it's not that is like the two things are connected the moment you talk about Chuck, okay? Yes,
I would much rather frame this in terms of like, what do we need in Node, right? Like,
yeah, okay.
We need colorization in Node. We
Yeah,
need the
okay.
string formatting in Node. I mean, it's something that it's not necessarily an API that we have to provide outside.
I
we
take
need to use it ourselves.
James,
So
I'll take an issue of writing. I will open an issue on the topic, okay, on the topic of ESM specifically, so
Right.
we can track it on the next one of our next meetings, because I think there is some mishap on the topic, okay.
Yes,
and
yeah.
we need to provide some level of guidance to popular module authors, okay, that please support both, because the community is not ready to move yet, or something like that.
In continuing with the point there, in terms of like Node needs the colorization, right? We need we need something internally that would kind of make it easier for us. We don't end up duplicating all this effort and this work. Now, whether or not we go off and implement all of that ourselves, expose a similar API versus vendor in Chalk, use it internally, and oh, by the way, we happen to make it available, right? That API available to users also. I think it's a similar conversation. That is a very similar conversation to what we've done with Undici, right? We don't expose Undici yet, right? But we do, we do use it to, for something Node needs, which is fetch. So maybe instead of going off and implementing all of this ourselves, right, in a separate module, we vendor in Chalk, we use it internally, and then this issue that thing that we talked about at the Collaborator Summit, this vendor namespace, we expose the version of Chalk that we do use through that vendor namespace. If somebody from the ecosystem wants to continue using the Chalk out on the NPM, they can, right? There's nothing that conflicts there.
I believe like there are a couple of things here. So I would actually even create such a module, even without colorization in there. I mean, we do have colorization actually. It's just not as nice from the API itself, but you are able to use the colors, which we provide at least from the ANSI codes. About exposing the direct module, I believe there are advantages and disadvantages, because sometimes we have different requirements in a way. And maybe sometimes also existing APIs that we might want to still continue to work with, or that we have, because we would duplicate some functionality at some point. This can be good, this can be bad. We just should take it into account. I believe colors support should have been added to Node.js a very long time ago. and we would not be in such a situation in that case. I believe it's a very fundamental basic thing that lots of users really require. And these things should be, out of my perspective, something in Node Core. It's just historically it has not been done that way. And now we are in the situation where people say, and that's totally fair, hey, you know, we have something and now you come along and do this something same-ish.
So why don't we split the conversation just a little bit? One is, do we want a separate top-level module for the string formatting functions we already have that are bundled into util? That's question one. We introduce that module, export those functions there, deprecate the ones that are on that are on util for now, and go for that. Even if that's just a doc deprecation. Second conversation is, do we need a new colorization API exposed for users, right? And how do we expose that? Is that going to be implement or vendor bundle?
Yeah.
And I think as part of that discussion, we need to figure out like the bigger issue is, as we bring in, you know, if we're talking about the vendoring proposal and stuff, how do we handle the case where, yeah, there's a really successful component within the community? You know, if there is, I think it's a much easier decision. If it is, I think we've got to factor in what impact are we having on what's already out there in that decision, right? And how we do it. And because we at least have to explicitly know if we're going to cause some sort of pain or impact on that front, and make a decision in that context at the very least.
And I think we need to be very selective here in terms of, does Node itself actually need that functionality? Like I don't think we should bundle anything from userland that Node itself is not using. So just bundling something just for the sake of making it available to users should never be a thing we do. It's got to be something Node itself is using. So it's there already because we need it, and we're just going to expose it also. So
I guess you can, you know, like in the case of colors and the analogy to Indici, it's like there's two different parts. There's one part of vendoring it in for our internal use versus exposing more generally, right? And so,
yeah,
you know, our approach could be, yes, we vendor something in, but we don't expose the whole thing. So it's not really a competitor, but we just, you know, have something that can be used internally.
Yeah. And you know, going back to the issue I opened there and what we discussed in the collaborator summit, that vendor namespace, right? If we do happen to have this thing there, right, whatever version we ship would be available through that vendor namespace. If someone, if someone wants to make use of it, it's there, it's available, right? You know, but if they want to pull the latest thing that's out on NPM, they can still do that, and there's no conflict there at all. So it's if we do end up exposing these things, rather than creating rather than creating a new API that, you know, that we end up having to support, that will conflict with whatever modules out there because folks are using them. Just, you know, all we're doing is saying, okay, here's a particular version of that user-defined API. It's available this way. I think it's, I don't know how the ecosystem good. I see it as being less contentious. But that's, you know, just my opinion.
So James, you said actually there were two things, two questions. I brought up a third one that I would like to clarify, and that is actually implementing or figuring out a process how to approach userland module authors in case we want to implement the functionality that exists in userland and is widely used.
Yeah. And Beth makes a great point there. You know, no matter what we do here, people are going to complain.
Right, but I think the point of like us having a well-defined, like, here's what we do. We reach out to people through these mechanisms. If we write that down, we've got a much better chance of handling it as optimally as we can. As you know, again, we can't always make everybody happy all the time, but if we basically say, here's our approach, we understand what that is, I think it'll improve the, you know, that's what we could do to improve the situation and flow as we try and do these kinds of things.
Overall, I believe we cannot answer all these questions today. I believe it's good that we figured out these, and like I personally see these three key questions. Two of the ones that James just brought up, and I had the third. I'm going to open up another issue for the third one because we don't have that. I would actually like the issue about the new formatting module was considered for pretty much the existing APIs already. Yes, I talked about adding new functionality because I believe we required it one way or the other. But like, should I open a new issue that explicitly only for the existing functionality to discuss that, or do you believe it's fine to keep it in that issue?
At this point, I think I would just go with the PR that starts to add that module which it moves the existing.
That's fair.
So
Yeah,
we can talk about it from there.
And the second question is pretty much what you brought up about vendoring modules, right? Yeah.
Well, the second one would basically specifically for colorization. Do we vendor chalk or do we have our own colorization API? Right. So kind of what are the issues there? And we can use that conversation to kind of help inform number 3.
Yeah, I almost think number 3 should be something tagged into 43413, which is like another general question we need answered as part of like, does that strategy make sense or not, or what?
Yeah.
And I think Beth's comment is almost a little bit different. Another issue we should talk through on that issue, which is like anything we expose will cause some additional work, some additional, hey, you're behind 2 releases. Why haven't you shipped the latest thing? And we'll, and so we've got to factor that into our decision as to whether, that makes sense too, or what the criteria is and that kind of things.
So, if that security release on some vendored module happens to also bring along breaking changes and we end up having to deliver it in an LTS release, what, how does that play with our LTS strategy, right? I think that if we do the vendored modules, similar to what we do with experimental APIs, we have to basically explicitly state that vendored modules are outside of our SEMVer major or SEMVer policy with regards to LTS, and it is possible for vendored modules to have breaking changes in updates from one release to the next.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's maybe that'll be one of the contentious ones. I would be like, if that's the case, maybe we shouldn't do it.
Or
right, like that's one of the key. Can we really have APIs and can we get away with that? I'm not convinced.
Yeah.
At the starting point anyway.
If not, should we do it at all? It's like, we need to be much more selective about what modules we vendor, expose to vendor, right? Maybe there's a criteria where they have to have a certain LTS policy.
Right. So I think that's all part of like that discussion on the vendoring approach. In addition, like that one is just like, what are we taking on is just as important as to also like, hey, what happens if we're clobbering somebody else, right? Like there's quite a lot of fairly tricky questions to answer in terms of just the vendoring as a general approach. I mean, I think we've effectively done it a number of times, but all of those have been modules in the node ecosystem, like into the node project. So like we vendor an inspector and DG, a few others, but those are all ones which they're under the org, and we can basically influence those things, right? maybe that's one of our asks, that the thing moves into the node organization before we vendor it.
We vendor, well, using the word vendor as in we use it. We vendor in Acorn for the REPL, but I mean, we don't expose it outside of, as its own API. And that's not in the node org. So yeah, it's
right. That's the difference. Our existing dependencies, we generally don't just re-export their APIs, right? We use them. So that's kind of a different usage. I think the vendoring is like we're planning to actually expose their APIs, so we're now subject to changes in those, right?
Yeah.
But I think we may have come, as Ruben says, we may have come to the end of we probably won't settle these questions in this discussion, and we should possibly move on to some of the other issues and continue the discussion in GitHub on those. I think, Ruben, you've captured some of the 3 questions. Some of those I think should go into that vendoring issue, and some of them can stay in the specific text formatting issues.
What I will say, kind of last comment for this item number 2, like vendoring in Chalk. There's 2 parts to that, right? To implement the actual support we need in Node, maybe we do vendor in the Chalk as a dependency internally, not exposed. Use that to implement the colorization that we need. Right.
That was actually my suggestion in the pull request and that I open up. So I mean, it only exposed like a partial functionality from Chalk in fact. Yeah, there like Chalk has more functionality than the code I wrote. And I did add, and that was probably one thing that I might have not done. Like I believe I added it in a comment that it should not yet be exposed to users, but I added a documentation already to show like, okay, that is how it would look like. It was meant as a draft to discuss things. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that's like a totally, and maybe that's what we got to come to. There's different cases. One is like we expose and one is we don't expose. And I think those are quite different cases, right? Okay, so, but yeah, if we can take the discussion back to the GitHub for now, and if we have time, more things to discuss, we could bring it back to the agenda next week. So, okay, everybody, okay, if we move on to the next issue.
And just just noting time, we've only got about 10 minutes left, and there are some private agenda items.
Okay, so the next one is tools add git blame ignore rev. So this is 43017.
Yeah, I had added it to the agenda, so I don't feel strongly about the PR anymore, so I closed it. So if anyone else feels strongly about it, you're more than welcome to open a PR to add that in again.
Okay. Okay, so that sounds good. So nothing further to discuss at this point, unless somebody wants to add it back into the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is build add dev container configuration. I think if I remember correctly, that was just an ask from Tierney to help move that forward. I did tell him if there was nobody else that could help, I would probably do that. So I don't think there's anything to discuss this week. And then the next issue was proposal Node.js vendor in namespace. We did want to keep some time for a private session at the end, so I suggest we try and time box this to just a few minutes. So I don't know, James, if that's a use, what we can usefully do in this time, or we should try and yeah.
Added that to the agenda largely, to go with, Ruben's discussion about the colorization. The main thing that it needs right now is just folks, TSC members to go take a look at that issue. There's been a few comments there already. Beth raised a couple, some really good points. Just needs consideration and discussion in the thread. So please go take some time to go take a look. That's it.
Yeah, I think that one, it's like we need to figure out also like some more concrete, what would it look like? Because that might get some more specific comments, like you were saying, is the proposal that things that are there aren't subject to our LTS policy or not? That kind of specific part, I think, would drive a lot of good discussion. Okay, so maybe we'll leave that, back to GitHub for now, but on the agenda, we'll leave it on the agenda so that it's people have awareness, and we loop back on it to try and help move forward on some of those tricky questions. Then the last one on the agenda is I would like to become a member, number 612. I think, Rich, you added that to the agenda, and I know there was some discussion last week when I wasn't here.
I'm sorry, which one is this?
It's related to I-18N.
I was just about to log off. Okay. Oh yeah, that one. Give me a minute here. Discuss amongst yourselves. Let's see. Reopening all the windows I just closed.
Okay. And again, I suggest like we time boxes at like 2 or 3 minutes, and then we leave the 5 minutes for the private section.
Oh yeah. No, this is going to be a longer discussion. So, the community committee had right now, the way translations happen for the most part is people submit PRs to the website repository, and that works okay, but it has certain obvious limitations. The biggest one being that we can't translate the API documentation because that's not in that repo, it's in the main repo. So they had set up, crowd in and had big plans and everything, but it all petered out. And right now it looks like in this issue, we're kind of moving back into that phase where a bunch of people say, I want, who are very well-intentioned, probably very competent, probably willing to be very hardworking, but also don't have any real current connection to the project, are all, I would love to be involved in this effort to expand translation beyond this and do more. And which is, we've sort of seen these things kind of, everybody volunteers and then it kind of peters out. I mean, we kind of saw that with other things that I won't name because I don't want to insult the people who did hard work for a short period of time. And so since there's no more community committee, it's basically up to the TSC to decide, do we want to encourage this and sort of be responsible for monitoring it and care and feeding and making sure it's successful? Or do we want to say, we tried this, it didn't work, we don't do this, sorry. Neither one's a good answer in my opinion. They both suck. And it's going to require a little bit of conversation to figure out what we want to do. So that's the context. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to add, but I don't think we can really have that conversation here today. Yeah.
So I think that's a good framing, and all we have time for, we can leave on the agenda to talk about it next time if we maybe have a little bit more time, and if people have had thought. Anybody want to add anything before we sort of close out and move on to the private session?
I'll just add that for anybody listening or reading the minutes that I do 150% encourage people to open localization/translation pull requests against the website repository for website content. That is not going anywhere. So let's get it all translated. But that doesn't help with API docs, unfortunately.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop the stream. We'll skip the strategic initiatives for this time since we're out of time. Other than I'll mention there's a PR to add a new one. So if people have a chance to take a look, that'd be great. Otherwise, thanks for everybody who's been on the stream and everybody who's taken